Meet the Cuban tree frog team. We are students at Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida, and our research question was what was the primary components of the Cuban tree frog diet. The purpose of our study was to determine the dietary habits of Cuban tree frogs and how this impacts native species. And we hypothesized that Cuban tree frogs primarily consume native insect and amphibian species, which contributes to the decline in biodiversity.
The Osteopilus septentrionalis were introduced to Florida in the 1920s, likely by stowing away on cargo ships. They were first identified in the Florida Keys and have since rapidly expanded across the state. These invasive frogs can live 5 to 10 years, grow up to 6 inches long, and have no natural predators in Florida. Cuban tree frogs are highly destructive. They prey on native wildlife, including frogs, lizards, and insects, and can cause structural damage by invading plumbing and electrical systems.
Their long lifespan, large size, and lack of predators have enabled them to outcompete the native species, the green tree frog. Green tree frogs are vital to Florida's ecosystems. As an indicator species, their presence signals a healthy environment. They also serve as an essential food source for many native predators and play a critical role in absorbing harmful pollutants and toxins through their skins.
More than 80% of our samples come from the North Beach Park in St. Augustine, Florida. The Volano Walkover provides an ideal habitat for Cuban tree frogs due to frequent flooding, high abundance of insects, proximity to the water treatment plants, and high human activity. Frequent flooding during heavy rain creates standing water essential for tadpole development.
Temporary pools reduce competition from predatory fish, giving Cuban tree frog tadpoles a better chance to thrive. The standing water attracts insects, providing many food sources for adult frogs and tadpoles. The water treatment plant may release warm or nutrient-rich water, creating microhabitats that support insect populations, which tadpoles and frogs feed on. The park's proximity to human development provides additional artificial lighting, which attracts insects at night, further supporting the frog's diet, and human structures like fences and pipes offer great hiding spots for the Cubans.
Disposable gloves were worn to avoid contact with the frog's skin secretions, which can be toxic. Once a frog was located, it was grabbed with gloved hands and secured in a net. Once in the net, 20% benzocaine, which is commonly known as Oragel, was applied down the frog's back to sedate it temporarily, ensuring humane handling. We are given a number in order to as which we capture them. Then the exact coordinates are taken of the frog, and screenshots of weather parameters such as temperature and humidity are also taken.
Was then placed in an inside-out glove and stored in the freezer at negative 17 degrees Celsius for a minimum of 8 hours to ensure euthanization by hypothermia. Certain identifications we became familiar with was the large toe pads and the skin on the top of its head. As you can see, the skin is fused to its skull and does not move compared to the rest of its body. The frog is then thawed for 15 minutes to make dissecting easier. Once it's done defrosting, its weight is recorded using a digital scale, and its snout to vent length is recorded with calipers to the nearest millimeter. If the toe pads have a dark spot, it's a male.
The frog was then secured on its back, and 3 incisions were made, one down the middle, one near the chest cavity, and one in the lower abdomen to expose the stomach. The stomach was then cut, and all the contents were emptied into a petri dish. The stomach contents were examined under a dissecting microscope to identify and classify dietary components. All different types of species were separated to determine the volume of displacement by use of a graduated cylinder, recording the volume displacement to the nearest millimeter. All stomach contents were stored in a vial with 70% ethanol to be preserved in the freezer.